Welcome to this year's Bronxville Voices Assembly. It's my pleasure to introduce the assembly, but before we get started, I just wanted to give you a little context on Bronxville Voices and sort of a short history and introduction. We've been doing voices now for almost 10 years, and the original idea for voices was to offer a space for students to share their passions, their experiences, and the reflections on both being in Bronxville, but also the broader community. I just want to note that the Bronxville Voices name was first derived almost 10 years ago. And over the years, it has been used basically for these assemblies. And while I know that the name has taken on different meaning in recent months and the past year, we want to acknowledge that there's no affiliation with this assembly and other platforms or social media outlets that might exist that also use the name. And I think that's an important distinction, but also honoring the voices and the stories of the students you're about to hear is important as well. So without any further ado, I'd like to pass over the baton to William Foreman to begin the assembly.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Winter Bronxville Voices and Stories Assembly. As Mr. Meyer mentioned, this program has gone on for the past 9 years, where we've gathered as a community to listen to powerful stories from our fellow classmates. Today, we'll hear speeches about loss, identity, and struggle throughout these persons' lives. As a warning, there are some sensitive topics discussed, specifically relating to mental health. If you find yourself in a crisis, please contact your guidance counselors, teachers, or the administration. They want the best and are here to help you. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Tim Atkeson to speak.
Up and roll! My staffman called from the campsite, his voice shaking the trees, signaling our 5:30 wake up. I exploded out of my sleeping bag and rolled all my belongings into a narrow, canvas, dirt-stained duffel that smelled vaguely of mold. Soon I was marching to the campsite, the sunrise at my back, swatting irksome mosquitoes, carrying my duffel over one shoulder and my tent over the other. I crammed down a breakfast of oats, bacon, and some unlucky bugs as we swiftly disassembled the night's campsite and loaded our canoes in the water. By 6:15, we were off and away. I spent every morning like this 2 summers ago on Keewatin Section A, a 7-week, 500-mile journey across northern Quebec, ending in the Inuit settlement of Moyak on the east coast of the Hudson Bay. To begin, our 10-person, 5-canoe crew was dropped off at the end of the last road in Quebec with our belongings, food, and equipment. From there, we moved northward and westward, first paddling down a winding string of creeks and rivers before emerging onto the vast expanse of Lac Bienville and the greater Quebecian watershed. The going was undoubtedly tough along the way. I spent hours confined within the woven bow seat of a wood canoe, my back twisted and arthritic from the one-sided exertion. After forgetting to bring bug spray and a net, my face swelled from 100 blackfly bites, staining my baseball cap and shirt with blood. My shins, knees, and spine sustained colorful bruises from violently slipping on submerged rocks while wading my boat through rapids, and from hoisting my food-laden wanigan onto my back. My feet and footwear remained in a state of perpetual wetness, shifting across the spectrum from coldly damp in the morning to saturated and squishy after a day's traveling in the late afternoon. A few times I lost my bearings and wandered amongst the pines for half an hour, alone in the woods, playing high-stakes Marco Polo to find the campsite again. It was a little terrifying to be swallowed by the vast wilderness of the north. In the first few weeks of the trip, I spent a lot of time thinking about the Hudson Bay and Amoyak. I talked with my boat partner Henry for hours about what the town would look like, who we might see, and what we would do when we got there. Aside from food, Amoyak may have been our #1 topic of conversation. The allure of completing Section A filled my mind. Paddling across the Great Whale and Coach rivers, we entered the second phase of our trip, in a more northern territory. Stunted trees grew few and far between on stony and passive hills, and a solid gray blanket of clouds permanently obscured the sun. Everything assumed a gray tint, mirrored by the sky and the barren rocks which dominated the landscape. Nevertheless, we stuck to our routines and methods, constructing fireplaces from the stones we'd found, collecting dead wood for cooking, and tying up a classic Kuwaitan fly every night. By this point, my section reached the peak of its ability. We had for several years learned the Kuwaitan way, the lifestyle that is our camp, and had come to a point of complete competence. I found my niche sawing and splitting wood, enjoying the satisfaction of a hearty swing and the delicate sensation of tearing the last fibers in a billet apart. I immersed myself in this work each evening, doing what I could for the section and dedicating myself to the swing and the split. In a few weeks' time, we turned our last corner to a moyak. Looking at the colorful, corrugated town, I felt empty. Where I had expected a surge of elation and accomplishment, I felt only a resounding knowledge that our trip was over. Why, when I had spent so much time, effort, had poured so much emotion into a single summer, why then did I not feel a thing? I learned a very important lesson then. It is not the places we go that define us, but what we do to get there. When I think back to my trip that summer, I do not dwell on the time I spent in the moyak, but rather on the campsites we built from scratch every night, the bruises I earned walking my loads through the woods, and the smoky scent of a warming fire. I think back to the routine on which my summer was built. I think back to waking up every morning, just after dawn, walking my tent and duffel down to the campsite amidst the whining mosquitoes, listening to the slosh and lap of the lake against the shore, and eating my bowl of hot oatmeal. These tiny moments represent my accomplishment that summer, minute by minute, day by day. Strung together, they paint the picture of who I am. Thank you. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Chloe Lee.
Hi. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Chloe Jane Lee, and I grew up hating my last name. Imagine that. Cringing a little bit every time you recite your name. I mean, I did it just now when I introduced myself to you 10 seconds ago. One of the most common questions following the dreaded, "What's your name?" is the even more dreaded, "So, where are you from?" When people ask me this, it seemed that giving them the answer that I was from New York, let alone America, wasn't enough. Typically, if I gave that answer, it was followed with a, "Oh, but where are you really from?" Or a, "No, but like, where are your parents from?" When I inevitably reached the point of saying I was from China, despite never having stepped foot in the country, it felt as though I was doing something wrong, some disservice to the quote, "forgotten countries of Asia." And by forgotten, I mean any country besides China, Japan, or Korea. There are 48 countries in Asia, if you didn't know. I know I didn't know that. I felt as though answering that I was from China was playing directly into some stereotypes. I imagined that whenever the question was asked me, that answer was already expected. I imagined that when people heard my last name or where I was from, an image of me was already being drawn in their mind. The answer I would much rather give is that I was born in New York City and I've lived in Bronxville for forever. I've attended the Bronxville school since kindergarten. Every day, I reap the privileges of living in Bronxville. I know that this town isn't easy on me, and a world that often isn't as easy for others. Bronxville is my home, much like America, and I have no other country to go back to. It is somewhat tricky, though, being a non-majority person or a minority living in a majority town that is predominantly white. I always felt somewhat displaced, especially when most of my friends can't say they've been asked if they've eaten a dog before. Just as I have lived in Bronxville for longer than I remember, I have also felt the weight of implicit bias. By implicit bias, I mean those preconceived attitudes or stereotypes that impact our understanding, action, and decision, often towards a particular group or thing in an unconscious manner. But I know I'm not entirely innocent either. I'm 16 years old, and for the majority of my life, I have been part of the problem. I've absorbed and internalized racism against myself so much so that for the longest time, I didn't even realize there was an issue with half of the things people said to me or I said about myself. In fact, I even used to think that people saying to me, "Oh yeah, you look like you'd be good at math," was actually a compliment. You might not understand what I mean, just as I used to not, but no, there is no such thing as a compliment built on undermining racial stereotypes. It would be dishonest for me to say that I've never felt trapped by the racial stereotypes. One's own identity is a perplexing thing, and I found myself not being able to live up to expectations that I didn't even set for myself. They had been set by what I thought other people thought of me. Well, I don't speak Mandarin or Cantonese. I don't vigorously celebrate Chinese New Year with any real traditions. Fortune cookies are my favorite part about Chinese takeout, even though fortune cookies aren't even Chinese in origin. And I did in fact get not one, but two 65s on my Algebra 1 test in 8th grade. Growing up, and so to this day, I see my classmates, peers, and friends take pride in who they are, as they should, both in their last name, and that even speaking openly on this now, that I look forward to people asking me what my last name is or where I'm from, but I know I'm getting there. I've come to learn that in the past, who I identified myself as wasn't even someone I considered to be me. That figmented figure of myself, pieced together by others' expectations and molding racial stereotypes, I could only see in the third person. I was an objective viewer of myself on the outside looking in, and that's when I began to recognize the way inherent racial biases and blind spots made up how I let other people perceive me. Our identities don't have to be our last name or where we come from if we don't want them to be. It doesn't have to be what school we attend or what sport we've slaved over our whole lives. It doesn't even have to be what school subject we're best at or how our closest friends would describe us. Most importantly, our identities do not have to be convoluted by outside pressures and pervasive external factors. Identity is one of the few things in life that we have control over. It is our own. Thank you. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our next.
I've been in this parasitic relationship, one that not only wears and tears at my heart, but also one that makes life worth living. This relationship is something I've kept on the down low for several years, battling the ups and downs alone, maybe in the hopes of seeming stoic, but is now something I'd like to open up about. From as early as I can remember, I've been walking in and out of a pool with my gear bag on my hip and my soaking wet hair in a top knot. It didn't matter what team I swam for or what pool we practiced in, because the memories will forever be ingrained in my mind. Swimming has always been a constant in my life. Even when I dropped other sports, like soccer and ballet, I always stuck with the water. This is where my relationship began. We got together at a better point in my life. I would entertain myself by running around my kitchen with bottles of Elmer's glue and reading Green Eggs and Ham. I went to a 30-minute swim lesson a few days a week, not knowing what I would get myself into. As a ditzy toddler, the only real relationship I knew of was my mom and dad. Somehow, 10 years had passed by, and those silly swimming lessons turned into something greater in my life. I began to hate the sport. I hated our relationship. I wanted out, but there was no escape. For 3 or 4 years, I physically went to the practices, although mentally I wasn't there. There are 7 practices offered per week, and I went to 4. They were 2 hours long, and I stayed for 1.5. I got out of the pool, grabbed my towel, and sat in the locker room. I also didn't go to any of the meets. I would cry to my mom and beg her to let me skip. Even if I did go, I didn't try. I skipped most of the warm-up and didn't take the races seriously. My heart wasn't in the sport. And for what? I don't know why I didn't just quit 5 years ago when I was absolutely miserable. This was one of the lowest points in my relationship. We were fighting. We weren't happy. But for some inexplicable reason, I fought and never gave up. Maybe it's because humans are biologically 70% water, and I felt this uncanny attraction to the pool. Or I felt the pressure of my parents and friends to continue pursuing a sport I didn't enjoy. Or maybe it was because I thought the countless hours in the water would feel like a wasted childhood if I had quit. My whole perspective of swimming changed, however, at the end of my freshman year. I got a new coach. Her name is Miriam, and the first week she coached me and my teammates. Her thick German accent made every word undecipherable. In due time, my friends and I grew to love her sweet personality, limited humor, and her expertise in coaching. It was because of Miriam that I grew to love going to meets and practice. There was one specific meet I remember. It was November 1st, 2019. I arrived early to the meet, trying to beat the Friday night traffic across the Tappan Zee. I grabbed a plastic chair and got my bag situated. I waited for my teammates to arrive, and soon warm-up began. I remember jumping to the crisp water. The serenity that was associated with letting all of the weight off my feet was an experience unlike anything else. Sinking to the bottom of the pool in complete silence. It's a feeling that is so surreal and at the same time is something I've experienced hundreds of times before. The same feeling is what saved my relationship. I learned to love again, and I was happy. When Miriam became my coach, I saw the pool as a place to grow rather than to suffer. She had this energy that made me want to wake up at 4:30 a.m. to jump into a cold pool. She forced me to realize my true potential. She forced me to go head on into this fight and in the end, win. She forced me to love the sport for myself. I was on a high. However, as we know, what goes up must also come down. By the winter of my sophomore year, I was burnt out. I only added time, and I felt like every practice I went to only pushed me back further. Nothing I did helped me improve at meets or even during hard sets at practice. For some reason, those extra 200s, which are only 8 laps, felt like 800 laps. And then COVID hit. We couldn't practice and there were no meets. I resorted to doing dryland to attempt to stay in shape, but no quantity of push-ups or burpees would amount to the 200 and more laps we do at practice. Throughout the spring, I wanted to quit this relationship so badly. I felt so helpless not being at the pool. All the mental toughness I had built up flew out of the window. When you get up on the block and take your marks, the crowds go quiet and all of your attention is focused on the glistening water beneath you. All you see is your reflection in the water. The indistinct mirror of your body represents your own persona, your tenacity, your grit, and your determination. You consider every practice that has led you to this race and fully concentrate on why you're here, to be better. Then, you hear the loud beep and extend yourself into the cold, crisp water. It's silent underneath. You can't hear the cheering, only your own thoughts. Swimming is a sport that takes resilience and dedication. It's an individual sport, meaning you have to want everything for yourself. During quarantine, I couldn't feel this way, and I felt so powerless. This was a part of my relationship where I felt like breaking up. I felt like I couldn't work any harder to be happy, and I was frustrated. But then, the summer of 2020 began. I had my first practice outside on June 19th, and it became an unparalleled day in my life. I remember walking down from the parking lot and seeing all of my friends standing on their designated spots. It was weird, just as weird as jumping into a full body of water for the first time since March 13th. The warm sun reflected on the water and into my eyes. It's a sense of warmth I'll never forget. The joy of dunking my entire head into a chlorine-filled body of water and kicking my legs up and down while rotating my burning shoulders. Even though I was badly sunburnt after not seeing the sun for a couple of months, I was happy. I remembered why I was in this relationship. I remember why I had put myself through hours of literal hell. I worked hard to be at the pool, to grow as an athlete and overall a person. In August, I got moved up to a faster team with kids my own age and also older. This was not only empowering, but also motivated me to work harder. I began to train under Dom, who is also my high school swimming coach. I've known him since I was in 7th grade, and when I was too scared to even ask him if I could go to the bathroom. He has always lifted me up and made sure that even if I was hanging onto the side of the pool crying because of a foot cramp, I was okay. I've learned from this relationship that life will test you in different ways. I couldn't tell you why I never quit swimming in middle school. I dreaded going to every single practice, and I didn't even go to the meets to prove my worth. The test was to see whether or not I would quit, and I'm so glad I didn't. My happiness levels go up when I walk into the musty and humid pool. Even when my heart is ready to explode, and my arms and legs are so weak that all I want to do is lie down, I push off the wall for another few laps. I swim for the same reason someone writes or acts or sings, to bring satisfaction to yourself after all of the suffering. I now train over 7 days a week, and I hope I can swim in college as well. The pool has been a place where I've made exceptional friends. I've cried laughing, and I've developed the best friendships with my coaches. This relationship I've dedicated over 5 years to has challenged me in ways I never thought. It has forced me to take a few steps back, take a deep breath, and rethink my life's purpose. When I'm swimming and all I can sense is pain, I think about the end goal. I think about how much I've given up to be here and how lucky I am to have given it up. For me, I believe there's nothing else I could do that could replace what swimming makes me feel. I realize that the pain is what brings me to perform my best. My relationship has seen its highs and lows, but in the end, I know it'll take me where I need to go. Thank you. I'm now excited to introduce our last speaker, Alex Dessart.
I think we can all agree 2020 wasn't what we expected. We experienced many lows and a few highs, but with the passing of people like George Floyd, Kobe Bryant, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Chadwick Boseman, and Alex Trebek in a single year, the word loss says it all. When I was in 7th grade, I remember experiencing heartbreaking loss for the first time. Back then, I attended youth group sermons with teens downstairs and adults upstairs in the sanctuary. Although I was with my older siblings, Spencer and Ellie, they would hang out with their friends. The other girls my age were longtime friends, and I was too shy to introduce myself. There was one time when I chose to sit next to a girl who was new to the church and attended the same middle school as I. She had a calm, welcoming presence. We were friendly to each other, and although we weren't extremely close, she made me feel accepted. Coincidentally, our families were also in the same community group. We would get together on Sunday nights to eat dinner and worship. I saw her a few more times after that, either in youth group or community group, and for the last time at a beautiful Christmas gathering at her house. It was a gloomy morning when I first heard the devastating news. The air was cold and the rain was falling. My mom was driving my siblings and me to school. Our morning routine was the same as usual. First the high school, then the middle school, then elementary. But before my mom could pull up to the middle school sidewalk, I received a text from Ellie. I read her text and was so confused. I couldn't process the words on my phone. That was the morning I found out that the girl who made me feel accepted was gone forever. As her family wrote, deep inside, she was suffering in the darkness, privately battling a deep, inexplicable pain, and succumbed to the silent illness of depression. Following my friend's death, I entered a dark place. It seemed as though I was going in a downward spiral. As grief consumed my thoughts, I was not mentally present anywhere. At the time, I was a competitive gymnast. I started to lose skills I had previously done without hesitation. Imagine yourself on the uneven bars trying to dismount, but your hands don't let go. In your head, you can do it, but your body keeps saying no. All I wanted to do was quit, but my mom wouldn't let me. I begged her. I was miserable and wanted nothing to do with anything. Fast forward 4 years. After quarantining for 2.5 months, I finally decided to stop gymnastics, but I was hesitant. There was only one reason why I didn't want my mom to push the blue send button, letting my coach know that I wasn't coming back. My identity. Why did this matter so much? Because when you are identified as the girl who does gymnastics, it's hard to let that go. Being an introverted kid, gymnastics was the only thing people knew about me. Having people know you for one thing is fine, but is that all I wanted, a label? After taking the summer off from sports, the athlete in me craved competition and training again. I started rowing. Despite knowing nothing about the sport, I took the challenge. The loss of what I left behind paved a path toward a new opportunity. I never really believed the saying, everything happens for a reason. It was sort of a cliche I had previously cringed at until now. My friend Julia, who just spoke, and I recently started a project together for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society called Students of the Year, also known as SOY. I heard about this fundraiser in September from a member of my rowing team. She found the experience to be valuable and rewarding. I don't know why Julia and I decided to select the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, because at the time, we didn't know of anyone with blood or bone marrow cancer. Just when I thought 2020 was over and things couldn't get worse, I heard more heartbreaking news. My family learned that on Christmas Day, my brother's friend from our old neighborhood was rushed to the emergency room with a severe headache. 2 days later, after discovering previously undiagnosed acute myeloid leukemia, he passed away. Robbie was 17. He planned to play college lacrosse in New York. His death was sudden and heart-wrenching. I've never been passionate about a volunteer project, but after hearing about Robbie, I began committing so much time and putting more and more enthusiasm into soy, dedicating all efforts to him. My goal is to raise awareness and help find a cure so that ultimately fewer people have to deal with unexpected loss. Even though I stopped competitive gymnastics, I kept my athletic spirit. Similar to when people pass away, their spirit lives on. And it's not about the amount of time we've spent with people, but the memories created and the everlasting love that will forever be in our hearts. With nearly 2 million deaths from COVID alone, sadness has overtaken our planet. Sometimes it takes losing someone to remind us of how impactful we can be, to make the world, especially the horrible 2020 world, a better place. The way we honor those who have died is by showing what we can do in our lives, by acknowledging the place they played in forming our own identities. Loss is never easy, but there's something we are able to gain at the end, which we never could have had without it, a deeper sense of ourselves and a sense of commitment to serving the world around us. All I know is that losing both of these kind friends, along with gymnastics, has led me to stand up here today and share my experience. Thank you. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our closing speaker, Kelly Wield.
Thank you to our speakers and everyone who came out to listen today. If you're interested in speaking at a future Voices Assembly, please don't hesitate to reach out to Mr. Meyer, myself, or any of the other speakers. And on that note, thank you.